Hello students, welcome to Learner's Planet, problem solving session 4 of metals and non-metals. In this session we will be discussing about the questions related to the properties of non-metals, about their chemical properties as well as the reactions which they undergo. We'll also discuss questions related to the metallurgy. So let's start our session. So coming to the first question, it is what types of oxides are formed by non-metals? So you must be aware of students by now. Non-metals, what type of oxides they form? They form acidic oxides as well as neutral oxides. Why? Why are they forming acidic oxides, or how come you know that they are forming acidic oxides? So I'll take example of one oxide, that is let's take it as a first question of our session. Example of NO2 or carbon dioxide or phosphorus pentoxide. Now students, what happens whenever you dissolve these oxides in water? What are the products they are going to form? They are going to form their respective acids. So these are what? Acidic oxides, and they also turn blue litmus red. These are also forming neutral oxides. Now here I'll tell you this NO2, it will form what acid? It will form HNO2, that is nitrous acid. It is forming carbonic acid, H2CO3, that is, it is a carbonic acid. So the P2O5 forms what type of acid? It will form H3PO4, that is phosphoric acid. Now they are also forming neutral acids. Neutral means they are not changing the color of litmus paper or the litmus solution. Like your carbon monoxide is a neutral oxide. Nitrogen monoxide is a neutral oxide. Dinitrogen oxide is what? So these are all what, students? These are all neutral oxides. Neutral oxides. So this was a question. And what type of oxides are formed by metals? They are basic oxides and amphoteric oxides. That is, they have acidic as well as basic nature. Now let's move to our next question. Non-metals do not react with water or steam to evolve hydrogen gas because why they do not react with water or steam? For so students, I would like to give you an advice that while solving multiple choice questions, you first, before reading options, you first recall the concept. Then it would be easy for you to solve such type of questions. So what is your question saying? That non-metals do not react with water or steam to evolve hydrogen gas. So if at all you are not knowing exactly what it is saying, you might be aware of that hydrogen. Hydrogen exists in the form of H ions, right? So in water molecules, say there is your water molecule. This water molecule dissociates into H plus and OH minus ions. So this is H plus and OH minus ions. Now this, for the release of this hydrogen ion as hydrogen gas, what is required here? Here we require electrons, or hydrogen ions require electrons. So what will they form so that it is released out as hydrogen gas? Now what was our question? That non-metals do not react with water to release hydrogen gas. Why? Now these non-metal students, are they forming positive ions? Say I am taking an example of oxygen or nitrogen. So, is this oxygen forming a positive ion? No. What is it forming? It is forming a negative ion. That is, this will be 2O2 minus. How? By accepting 2 electrons. Now, when non-metals are forming negative ions by accepting electrons, how can they release hydrogen from water? So this is your answer. Now let's check out for our options. What are they? They are electronegative. Is this option correct? Correct. So this option is correct. They are electropositive. This option is wrong. Now another option is the reaction of non-metals with water is an endothermic reaction. Is it correct? It cannot react only. Even if you will supply energy, then also it cannot release hydrogen gas. Why? Because non-metals cannot lose electrons. So even if you are supplying energy, the reaction will not take place, or hydrogen gas won't be released. So this option is also wrong. Now let's check out for the last option. Now here students, don't just mark one option and move to the next question. It might happen that there are two options correct. Like say here, they cannot give electrons to reduce hydrogen ions of water. So what all are the options correct here? Both A and B. So this is how we solve questions. It doesn't require, you should know the logic behind it. You don't need to remember that, you don't need to mug up. Non-metals do not react with water, non-metals do not react with acid. Just try to find out the logic behind that. What is the logic? Why it is not reacting? Because it is electronegative. Why it is not releasing hydrogen gas? Because it is not giving electrons to hydrogen ions. Now let's take up our next question. This question is, an element reacts with oxygen to give a compound with high melting point. This compound is also soluble in water. The elements are likely to be. What is it saying? So what is it saying, students? An element reacts with oxygen to give a compound with a very high melting point. Let's take an element X. It is reacting with oxygen. And what is it forming? So it is forming an oxide here. Now what is the property of this oxide? That this oxide has a very high melting point. And its second property is that it is soluble in water. So it is soluble in water. So these are the two properties of oxides. Now let's work out. For all the options, here there is no logic actually. Now say calcium. When calcium is dissolved in water, it will form what? Calcium plus oxygen, and it is going to form calcium oxide, that is CaO. Now this CaO has got a very high melting point. And secondly, it is soluble in water, that the CaO reacts with H2O and it forms what? It is forming calcium hydroxide, that is CaOH twice. So both the conditions are fulfilled. Same is the case with magnesium. Magnesium with oxygen is forming magnesium oxide. This too has a high melting point. Why am I saying this? High melting point. Because they are ionic compounds. So ionic compounds have got very high melting points. And it is also soluble in water, forming what? Magnesium hydroxide. Next is aluminium. Aluminium forms an oxide, that is Al2O3. And which hydroxide it is forming? AlOH whole thrice. So what would be your answer here, students? It would be all of these, because these are all metals. Had it been any of the non-metal would have been given here. So you would have marked that. You would have to select the metals out of it. But these are all metals. Now let's take up our next question here. Here we have got 4 questions in line. Let's see, these are fill in the blanks. Dash compounds are soluble in water but insoluble in organic solvents. So students, what type of compounds are soluble in water? You just keep in mind what is soluble in water is salt. Salt is soluble in water. But is it soluble in benzene or petroleum? Can you dissolve salt in oil? No. Now what type of compound is a salt? It is ionic compound. So the answer of your first question would be ionic. Now let's take up the second question. Ethyne is a dash compound, that is either ionic or covalent. So ethyne is a compound of carbon. Carbon is a non-metal. So non-metals form what type of compounds? Covalent compounds. So what would be our answer? It would be covalent. So it's always that metals form ionic compounds, non-metals, they form both type of compounds, ionic as well as covalent. But here carbon particularly forms covalent compounds, because in case of carbon, say what is the atomic number of carbon, students? It is 6. How many electrons it is having in the valence shell? In the valence shell it is having 4 electrons. So it requires large amount of energy to lose these 4 electrons. And also, that is, when it loses its 4 electrons, what ion it will form? C plus, C4 plus. And it forms negative ions. Now in this case, your carbon is what? Non-metal. So this carbon cannot form 4 plus ions. Why it cannot form 4 plus ions? Because it will require large amount of energy to lose this 4 electrons. To form an anion, what it can do? It will have to accept 4 electrons. After accepting 4 electrons, it will form C minus 4 ions. So, in both the cases, it is requiring large amount of energy. So, what type of compounds this carbon will form? Carbon will share its electrons with the other elements. Now, our next question here is P2O5 NO2 turn dash litmus solution to dash. So what are these? Phosphorus and nitrogen? These are what, students? These are non-metals. Now this phosphorus and nitrogen are non-metals. Now what I have told you, that non-metals form acidic oxides. So acids turn blue litmus solution red. So what will be our fill-ups? It would be blue and red. So this is your answer. Now let's take up our next question. Na2O CaO turn dash litmus solution dash. What is Na and what is Ca? So Na is a metal as well as calcium is a metal. What type of oxide they will form? They will form basic oxide. So it will convert what? Red litmus solution blue. Now here it's every time that you are given some color, that it is converting red to blue or blue to red. It may also happen that you are provided that the litmus solution is purple in color. So what will be the color of purple, or I'm writing here litmus solution? Now this litmus solution in the neutral medium has got what color? Purple. Now if I am putting some acid in it, it will become red. So it's not that always you will be provided either red litmus or blue litmus. You may be asked that the color of the litmus solution would be dash in acidic medium and dash in basic medium. So if I am putting some base in it, it will become blue. So you have to remember this. Now let's move to our next question. Naphthalene. You must have seen naphthalene balls at your home. That is those white colored balls which are kept in your cupboards or in the basins or in the washrooms. Now if taken in a spatula and heated, it is observed that it melts easily. Naphthalene is a dash compound. So tell me, I have told you that the ionic compounds have got strong forces of attraction. So they are solids. And have you ever seen salt evaporating or salt changing from solid to gaseous state? No, because salt is a ionic compound. But in this case, your naphthalene is changing from solid state to a gaseous state, or it is a volatile compound. Volatile means the compound which changes from solid to gaseous state. So as it is a volatile compound, so what type of compound it would be? It would be a covalent compound. Covalent. So remember, the ionic compounds are in the form of crystals and they are non-volatile. Whereas covalent compounds can be either solid or liquid or gaseous and they are volatile. That is NaCl aqueous dash electricity, whereas PCl5 aqueous dash electricity. Now in such type of questions you need to analyze the type of compound present, whether it's ionic or it is covalent. So when NaCl is what? It is an ionic compound. So what it will do? It will conduct electricity. Whereas PCl5 is what? It is a covalent compound because it is a compound of non-metals. And so it does not conduct electricity. So this would be your answer. So for solving such type of questions, what you need is to remember the type of compound, whether it's covalent or ionic. This is a simple question. Ionic compounds have high melting points due to dash between the ions. Now say, let's take up the example of any ionic compound, let's say copper chloride or sodium chloride or potassium chloride or sodium oxide. Now what are these? These are all ionic compounds and they have got a very high melting point. Why? Because of the ionic bond or the strong force of attraction between them. So in this fill-up, if you write ionic bond, then also it's okay, correct. Or there is strong force of attraction. Where? Between the ions. Now let's move to the next question here. Copper sulfate is a dash compound. What is it? It is a covalent or ionic. Now to find out whether a compound is covalent or ionic, what you should do is, let's first analyze that what is copper? Is it a metal or a non-metal? It is a metal. What is sulfate? Sulfate is SO4 minus. So what will be the formula of copper sulfate? The formula of copper sulfate would be CuSO4, in which copper is present as Cu2 plus and SO4 is 2 minus. So what type of compound it would be? It would be an ionic compound. Now our next question is, ammonia is dash hydride of nitrogen. Now in this case, I have told you that hydrides, they are formed by what? Metals. By highly electropositive metals which can give, or by more electropositive metals like sodium, calcium, which can give electrons to hydrogen. But in this case, it is a hydride of nitrogen. So what is nitrogen? Nitrogen is a non-metal. So what type of hydride it should form? Your nitrogen is forming a covalent hydride. So this is forming H, and H. And your nitride is forming a covalent hydride. So what is the formula? What is the answer here? It is forming a covalent. So for solving such type of questions, what you need is, you need to analyze whether the substance or the element given is a metal or a non-metal. Yeah, here we have got a matrix match. Let's start with the first, PCl5. What are the options here? Covalent compound, KOH. This first option is out of question. Second is a covalent compound. So your PCl5 is what? It's a covalent compound. So what would be the answer to the first? It would be B. Now what is the second one? It is calcium chloride. Again your calcium is what? It is a metal. And chlorine is a non-metal. So bond formed between a metal and a non-metal is an ionic bond. So the answer would be C. Now our next is oxygen plus water. There's this oxygen. Oxygen is a non-metal. And in the very first question I told you that the non-metals form electronegative ions, or the non-metals are electronegative and they form negative ions. There will be no reaction with water. So what would be our answer here? It would be D. Then what is left is A. Of course your potassium is what? Is a metal and it dissolves in water, forming potassium hydroxide and releasing hydrogen gas. So this was the answer of your question. Let's take up the next question. It is again a matrix match. Copper chloride solid. What type of compound is it? Is it a covalent compound or ionic compound? Or there are options like turns blue litmus red or red litmus blue. So I think there is a compound, so we should match it to a compound itself. So what type of compound is copper chloride? It would be ionic because it is a compound formed between metal and a non-metal. Our next is sulfur tetrachloride. It is what? Compound formed between a non-metal and a non-metal. So it would be a covalent compound. The next is solution of SO2 in water. So students, this is SO2. What type of oxide it is? Your SO2 is a non-metal oxide. And what type of solution it will form? If I'll dissolve SO2 in water, what I'll get here is sulfurous acid, that is H2SO3. So what am I getting here is H2SO3 and this is an acid. So what it will do? It will turn blue litmus red. So what would be my answer here? B. And I should erase the first one. The ionic compound, the option here is C. So, solution of Al2O3 in water would be, it will turn red litmus blue, that is D itself. This is solution. Solution of Al2O3 in water. How? Al2O3 when dissolved in water will give aluminium hydroxide. What is aluminium hydroxide? As it has got hydroxide ions, so it would be basic in nature. So it turns red litmus blue. Now our next question here is HCl gas. This is, I am talking about dry HCl. Does not conduct electricity. It cannot conduct electricity. So this option is correct. Now let's move to the next. AlCl3 in aqueous solution. What is it? Now this AlCl3 in anhydrous, or I can say this anhydrous aluminium chloride is what is covalent, or it exists as a dimer. It is covalent and it exists as a dimer. But as soon as you dissolve it in water, that is AlCl3 in water, what will be formed? It is forming ions in water. So it is giving out ions. So, or the bond here becomes ionic. So there are now lots of energy considerations here, like hydration energy, the ionization energy, the electron affinity. We will be discussing this in your 11th sessions. But here you remember that anhydrous AlCl3 is covalent and it is existing in the form of dimer, that is Al2Cl6, whereas AlCl3 in water is ionic. So what would be its answer? It conducts electricity. Now this ferric chloride, it is an ionic compound or a covalent compound. Now this ferric chloride will not conduct electricity, that is for sure. Here you can't be sure of whether it's ionic or a covalent compound. So it will not conduct electricity, so we'll mark A here. Now this phosphorus pentachloride is what? There is one more option, that is chlorinating agent. So there are lots of chlorine with phosphorus pentachloride, that is your PCl5. It will dissociate and it will give what? It will give PCl3 plus Cl2. So this will be a chlorinating agent. Now what is left is HCl gas. So it is a covalent compound. So HCl gas is a covalent compound as well as it does not conduct electricity. Your this thing AlCl3 in aqueous solution conducts electricity. FeCl3 does not conduct electricity, whereas your phosphorus pentachloride is a chlorinating agent. Now let's take up our next question. Sodium metal is more reactive than copper because sodium reacts with oxygen easily to form sodium oxide. The reaction is explosive also. But copper does not react with oxygen easily. That is also right. Copper reacts with oxygen on prolonged heating. So this option is correct. Now our next one is sodium reacts with dilute acids evolving hydrogen gas, whereas copper does not. Is it correct? This is also correct. Then reaction of sodium with water is vigorous. Then copper is present below hydrogen in the reactivity series. This is also correct. So what will be your right answer? Your right answer would be all of these. Now in your previous question, students, your FeCl3, had it been in solution or in water, it would conduct electricity. But solid FeCl3 will not conduct electricity. In any case, in gaseous state, HCl is also not conducting, as well as FeCl3 in solid will not conduct electricity. But if it is dissolved in solution, it will conduct electricity. So these were all the questions of this session. Now I'll conclude this session and we will be meeting for the next session, and there we will be solving questions related to metallurgy questions. So thank you students for listening patiently.